Welcome to Women in the Workforce. So happy to have you join us tonight. We're going to be talking with Bess de Farber on finding inspiration through collaboration. Welcome, Bess.
Thank you. So I'll just start right away by saying I appreciate the invitation to talk about this journey of collaboration, which has been the hallmark of my careers. It's such an important concept and skill to develop. And not surprisingly, we aren't born knowing how to do it naturally. So let me just start with my nuclear family. This is my papi and my mommy. My papi, this is actually in Miami Beach. My papi came through Ellis Island in 1912, escaping from Poland when the Russians were conscripting young boys to be in the army in preparation for World War I. He settled in the Bronx. He had an 8th grade education and he drove a cab. That's about as much as I know, except that he spoke 4 different languages. He was related to my mother, who was born in Buenos Aires, to a family that had emigrated from the Ukraine. So what happened was that mommy had several degrees. She had a degree in early childhood education. She had a degree in social work, and she had a master's degree in music theory. So they arrived in Miami Beach. My mother did not speak English, and my father was basically unemployable. He had a heart attack, and he was living in Miami with my mother. Eventually, my mother became the first Spanish-speaking social worker to work at Jackson Memorial Hospital when the Cuban immigrants were coming to Miami in the 60s. So that's my brother, David. So here we have a photograph of this is my 2nd grade class at Coral Way Elementary School. And what's special about this is that it was the first bilingual and bicultural program in the United States. We didn't know as students that this was an experiment, that the teachers had no idea what they were doing. They had no instructional materials. Everything was created from scratch. You can see me, I'm sitting in the first row. I have the dark hair and the headband. Behind me, you can see Orestes Gonzalez. He and I were the only 2 Spanish-speaking children in this class of all English language speakers as first language. So they put us there because our English was rather good. And Orestes had learned English on the street. He was a Cuban immigrant as well. Now, over the years, I realized that this was a special experience. And when I was at the University of Arizona, I contacted a scholar and asked him if Coral Way had any significance to him. And he said, yes, I've never met anyone who went to that school. And it turns out I was in the first class that graduated the bilingual program all the way through 6th grade. And when I told him about my experiences, he was surprised and said, well, we have to find out more about this because the literature about that school does not give credit to the English-speaking students that they learned Spanish. So there's a lot of misconceptions about what happened at that school. So we started a project, a collaborative grant project that brought us both to Miami to do interviews with a lot of my classmates that you see here. And we did oral histories. And then I partnered with a different scholar at the University of Florida when I arrived there as the grants manager for the libraries. Maria Cody, and she and I continued to do more interviews. We ended up with over 20 interviews, including past teachers who are no longer with us, and many of my colleagues and classmates. And then we did some further research at the Ford Foundation, who had granted money to this school to help them with teacher planning. And we also found a thesis at the University of Miami, and we created a giant collection of primary materials about the Coral Way Elementary bilingual bicultural program. And then Maria Cody wrote a book about it, and it's now out there, so people will know the true story of what happened at this elementary school. But I was rather a displaced person here all those years, those 6 years. It seems like a long time when you're a kid, because I was the only student that I knew, other than my brother, whose home life was Spanish speaking, English speaking, and Yiddish speaking. None of the other students in this group had those combination of languages in their home. We did have a Greek Orthodox church near us, so there were students who were studying Greek as well as English and Spanish. We also had Hebrew school, so the Jewish students were also learning Hebrew. So I was exposed also to Hebrew during this time. And but it never felt comfortable to me, because I was from a different type of household. Luckily, I became a musician in junior high, and I'm just sharing these photographs of orchestra photographs from Miami Senior High School. And this was really my first chance to be collaborative. What's unique about being a musician is that you perform with people you may never have had a conversation with, because you come in, you have to start, you put your instrument together. You might know or have conversed with your neighbor a little bit, but in general, the conductor starts rehearsing. He or she is telling you everything you're doing wrong, and then you repeat the process again over and over and over again. And then at the end, you're quiet during the whole time because you're not allowed to speak. It's not a two-way conversation with a conductor. It's a very authoritarian environment and system. So I grew up as a musician, as a clarinetist, with my colleagues. I wouldn't say they were necessarily my friends. I didn't know them very well because we never actually had a chance to talk to each other, but we made beautiful music together. And that really was the pattern of my life, working with sitting next to people I didn't really know too well and making music with them, and doing it over and over and over again with hundreds of different people. Now, if you notice in these photographs, the girls, I think, all have the same, actually, it's not these. Yes, it is. Our first project was that all the girls would have the same blouse and the same culotte, long black skirt. So that was my first collaborative effort as the president of the orchestra in 11th and 12th grade. So I thought I would share that because it was successful. And then in the 80s, I was in Dunedin, and I went to a bagpiping concert in the park. And I went up to, and I didn't know anything about the bagpipes, but what I thought was really special was that this group, the City of Dunedin Pipe Band, played absolutely in tune and absolutely in perfect synchronicity. And I went up to this was the director, this photograph that you see here. His name is Sandy Keith. He passed away more than 10 years ago. And I asked him if he would teach me to play, and he kind of laughed at me and said, "Are you kidding? You're too old." I was 28 at the time, and I started studying the bagpipe in 6 months. I was playing in the professional band in the city of Dunedin Pipe Band, and ultimately played in 2 world championships in Scotland, and as a solo performer all over the country and in Canada. But the thing about bagpiping and collaboration is very different from what happens in the orchestra. So once you start to play in a bagpipe band, you play in a circle because you have to watch the fingering of the person in front of you. So everyone has a target person that they are hypnotized by, so that they're watching the fingers of the person across the circle. And that's how the synchronicity is created within the group. And it's hours and hours and hours of practicing and memorizing music together. And it may only be 5 minutes of music, but you've spent 100 hours together with these people that play with you and practice with you for that 5-minute competition that you perform in front of judges. So this kind of practice really changed the way I viewed collaboration in a huge way, because it was real to me that you could have deep, perfect synchronicity with other people who are doing the same thing with you. Now, the concept of this concept of loose ties also comes into play when you're a musician. You know a lot of different people who have a lot of different skills. You know just a little bit about them. And it turns out that when you're collaborating with other people, it's most important to know lots of people. Lots of people, and even if you only know 1 or 2 things about them, that connection, that information can create a new connection for you down the road when you need that skill, or when you realize that that person could contribute to a project, or can give you a resource, or knows something important that could inform your project. So the London School of Economics did a huge research study in, I guess it was the early 80s, that had to do with analyzing patents at the patent office. And what they did was they interviewed submitters of patents, scientists or new inventors, and they asked them, how many close relationships do you have in your daily life? Or how many very loose, very weak relationships do you have? The number of people that you interact with on a daily basis. And it turns out that the people who were more isolated and only had very close friends that they interacted with had fewer patents than those scientists or inventors who had lots of very weak relationships. They call it loose ties, or loose relationships with people. So this is a really important concept for collaborations and successful collaborations and resource sharing. Okay, so the concept I wanted to talk about also has to do with asset-based community development. In the early, let's say, it was in the early 90s, I was invited to a presentation by a gentleman. It was either Kretzmann or McKnight. These are 2 authors that self-published a book called Building Communities from the Inside Out. And they were both at Northwestern University and had been experimenting with social and behavioral sciences. And their students would go out into communities where there were lots of disadvantaged people or homeless people, and interview them to find out what their skills were. And they realized that people all have skills and assets, and you need to start there to build a community or to solve problems. So I started using those concepts in my work as a grant seeker and applying for grant proposals. So the pie chart on the left, you can see this is an applicant organization that has lots of assets, and they're focusing on their assets to contribute to their project. And they're saying in their proposal, we only need this small amount of money, whether it's $5,000 or $10 million. We have way more assets to contribute to this project. And we just need this small amount of money in comparison to the total cost of the project to actualize and energize all of these assets to contribute to this project so that we can have a successful outcome. When a grant reviewer reviews a proposal that has that much collaborative effort and investment from different assets in the community, they actually feel guilty not funding it. So that has been the key to my success. The other side of this pie chart, you have the needs-based planning for grant projects, where the applicant organization has very few assets to contribute, but they feel the need to accentuate the reason why they need a greater amount of funding than they are actually contributing to the project. So in using,
Bess,
yes.
Bess, I hate to stop you, but Shari Markowitz has just joined, and she is somebody who would definitely appreciate this. So I hate to make you back up, but this is so important. I think Shari would really appreciate hearing you talk about this again.
Okay,
Sorry.
not a problem. Okay, so because I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been a grant maker and managing the distribution of grant funds for social services, for arts and culture, and for human and race relations. But I've also been a grant seeker, and I've also been a consultant to other organizations that do this work, grant seeking. The success that I've had is directly related to this concept of asset-based community development that I learned from Kretzmann and McKnight, who wrote this wonderful book called Building Communities from the Inside Out. But this is my graphic, it's not their graphic. Okay, so on the left side, we have asset-based planning for grant projects. And you can see that the applicant organization has lots of assets, their own assets within their organization and assets coming into the project from outside of their organization that exist within the community. And regardless of how much they're asking for, whether it's $5,000 or $10 million, what this communicates, what their application communicates, is we have way more assets than what we are asking for from you as a funder. And
those assets are not necessarily monetary. You're looking at all types of
time,
assets.
it's time, skills, resources, facilities, equipment, knowing people, knowing other people, knowing people who know other people who know other things. So you're bringing all of this into your proposal. You're bringing your partners with you. And those partners have assets to contribute that are different from the applicant organization's assets. So now you have this huge diversity of resources that are being contributed to this project proposal. And ultimately, the funder feels guilty. The reviewers will feel a sense of guilt if they don't invest in this project. Because if they don't invest, let's say there's a need for a project coordinator, there's actually a need for travel to visit different places of the country. The project has a lot of needs that cannot be met by this enormous contribution of assets. And so the funder, the reviewer begins to think, wow, if I don't fund this, then all of these partners can't participate together to contribute to this project. As opposed to the needs-based planning for grant projects, which is where the organization really highlights all the things they do not have. It's more of a victimization type of proposal where the applicant hopes that the funder feels sorry for their situation, but it's a terrible investment to invest in an organization that is coming across as more of a victim than a resource. So this organization isn't connected to its community assets necessarily, and its own assets are very weak. They need more funding in terms of the proportion of assets, the ratio of assets to needs than the left side diagram. So with that in mind, in 2002, actually 2001, I was called by the Broward Community Foundation. This was after 9/11, when their resources had decreased. They asked me if I would put together a workshop that would actually create collaborative relationships and collaborative projects in real time. Not the theory of collaboration. It had to do with actually planning projects at a workshop where people who worked for nonprofits would develop their collaborative projects. So in 2002, I did this first example of Broward County nonprofit executives, marketing people, program people getting together. They are wearing on their torso a profile of their organization that includes their mission, their programs, the number of people who come to their programs, their facilities, their partners, their funders, etc. And I put all the information together with a graphic designer, and we printed out these, we called them profile signs. There were 50 organizations represented. In this particular photograph, this person was representing, the gentleman on the right was representing, I believe it's an organization that serves the blind. And he brought his own interpreter with him who could read the profile signs of his partners. I don't actually know who the woman is representing, what organization she was from. Basically, they had 3 minutes to read each other's profiles and have a conversation about what projects they could do together. But that was just the initial conversation. We were together for 2 full days of planning and exploring ways that we could work with each other, that these organizations could leverage each other's assets to benefit their organizations and the clients or recipients of their services. For example, we asked, after everyone had met each other, we asked, how many of you have backpack programs? And it turned out there were 5 different organizations competing for funding from Office Depot, just to have free backpacks filled with supplies for kids. The suggestion came out that if only one of those organizations coordinated for the 5 organizations, then each of the 4 other organizations could apply for funding for other things from Office Depot. So it was just an excellent example of how you could leverage community assets for broader benefits. Well, that was such a successful journey. There were so many collabs that I facilitated, also with Barbara Noble in the beginning, who's here on the presentation. And then I was at the University of Arizona Libraries, and we tested out the collabs at that university in the libraries for new employees who didn't know each other. So we had profiles of their individual histories and their passions, what skills they had to contribute to the libraries, etc. And those were quite successful. And then I was recruited to be the grants manager at the University of Florida. And on the left, you see the first collab at that university in 2009. And these are faculty members of the College of the Arts. And the problem we were trying to solve in this collab was that each of the departments within the College of the Arts had faculty that didn't interact with any of the other departments. So there was dance, there was music, there was visual arts, there was art history, there was theater, and they were basically silos of departments with faculty that didn't work with each other. So this collab lasted 45 minutes. They made their own profile signs answering 3 different questions. That's why you see the 3 different index cards, colored index cards. Each of their signs was color coded so that they knew they were not allowed to speak to anyone from their own department. And at the end, we had a whole new course that was developed with 3 different faculty members from different disciplines. It was the first interdisciplinary course to come out of the College of the Arts. And there were other partnerships that I never found out about that happened that day. So I created a team of library workers, the marketing director and the librarian for journalism. And we started applying for grant funds to run these collaborating with strangers workshops. And the top photograph you see here is for the College of Journalism. It was they created this program where companies apply to get assistance from journalism and communications majors at UF. So graphic design or journalistic skills. And these were the students and faculty members who were working. It's called the agency at UF. And their profiles, they created their own profiles and then shared them. And we had about 50 people in that workshop. The bottom photograph is the first class, during the first class of a course for PhD students who were just beginning their PhD program in journalism and communications. And they met each other for the first time, having these conversations during a collab within their classroom. So it can be in the library, it can be within a classroom, or it can be a special event where you just invite a group of people to learn from each other and to leverage each other's assets, forming partnerships and using resources and learning about resources that you never would have known about or discovered. So one of the outcomes that came from this bottom PhD student workshop, well, we did so many workshops for these PhD students over the years. I think we did 5 different workshops for the first PhD class of each of these courses. And in this class, one of the outputs was that as part of their teaching assistantships, they have to get guest speakers. So this one student said, well, now I have all the guest speakers for all of my classes that I'm going to be teaching, because now I know the assets that exist within all of these PhD students. And then we went on from there. So at this point, 3,700 people have participated in collaborating with strangers workshops using the same exact method, where you have a profile sign that you wear on your torso that provides information about yourself, your passions, your skills, your partnerships, your past collaborative projects, And usually we ask the question, what's one thing most people don't know about you? I love this picture on the right. It's one of my favorite. I have thousands of these photographs. But on the right, you have my colleague who was the journalism librarian and a co-author of the book Collaborating with Strangers, facilitating workshops in libraries, classes, and nonprofits. And the gentleman who's reading her profile sign is too tall to read it, so he has to hold it in his hand and read it. And he is a faculty member at the College of Journalism at UF. And this is their first meeting. They've never had a conversation before. So he's reading her profile and she's reading his. And then they had this wonderful conversation with each other. On the left are just examples of sponsors that have contributed funding and other assets to making these Collaborating with Strangers workshops happen over the years. And you can see there are lots of them from Palm Beach and Martin counties. And then these are the 3 books that I was able to publish with the American Library Association and with Rowman and Littlefield that talk about the philosophy of asset-based community development, collaborative grant seeking, and this idea of leveraging assets to build communities from the inside out. So these are the 3 books, and they are available at your local library or at your local academic library. And that's the end of my talk, and I was hoping that maybe we would have some questions from some participants.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got a bunch of questions. Hi, Sherry. You want to introduce
Hello.
yourself to Bess?
Hi, Bess. I'm Sherry Markowitz. I live in San Antonio. And this was interesting to me because for over 20 years, I've been on the board of a nonprofit we are celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. So
Wow. What's the nonprofit?
it's the Hebrew Free Loan.
Okay.
And so I'm just rolling around in my head, like how we would collaborate, because we were the best known secret in San Antonio for the last 95 years. And we are just now getting our name and our purpose out there. And I'm
Well,
just
I would recommend this Collaborating with Strangers book. It's a guide. It's a how-to guide. It's actually now in over, I think it's 180 libraries around the country. So it could be that you can just ask your public library to buy this book so that you can check it out and maybe start using these concepts. And there's a mini collab that you can do just with index cards that's described in the book. We use that method sometimes in conferences where there's just not a lot of time to fill out a profile card. So that there could be 3 or 4 questions on an index card, a large index card that people would see as they're walking into their session. And the point is that it takes too long for me to get to know you unless I go to lunch with you or I interview you. And this just very simple profile information on an index card can be the door that opens where you can find commonality with someone, or you can find resources that you would never have discovered if you hadn't had this interaction. And if it's a short interaction, then you can have 7 or 8 of these 3-minute conversations with 7 or 8 different people. just imagine having lunch with 7 or 8 different people, how much effort it would take you to do that. So the goal is to cut down on the time it takes to get to know someone else's essence. Like, what are they about? What do they know how to do? Who do they know? You know, what kind of work are they engaged in? And what are they passionate about? What is interesting about their life that they want other people to know about?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
It has worked for me and my team and the 3,700 people who've participated in these workshops or in these encounters that cut through all the niceties and cultural differences, cut through abilities and disabilities, because anyone can attend this, and leave with resources that are really beyond their imagination. And potential friendships as well, potential mentors as well, because you just don't need that cultural, how's the weather and how many kids do you have, and kind of it's more direct to get you to the information that you need to form a connection, or not to form a connection and move on to the other person.
Bess, you
Okay.
were mentioning earlier, I'm not sure if Shari was already with us and Alexandra has just joined. You were mentioning a couple of successful collaborative partnerships that you facilitated. What were some of the most innovative collaborative projects you facilitated or led? And maybe some of the ones you already mentioned, you might revisit.
Well, there was one recently called the Diverse Book Finder. Um, that's a project. It's a little complicated project. It originated at Bates College in Maine, and some of our librarians in the College of Education found out about this project, where you input all of the Library of Congress ISBN numbers into their catalog analysis tool. So let's say you have it's for children's books, and originally it was for picture books, and you would input your whole collection of picture books into this catalog and analytic tool, and it would rate the quality of the diversity in those picture books. This is really an unbelievable tool. So just to make sure that your collection of picture books was of high quality BIPOC characters. So these librarians at UF found this, and they did their analysis on their own picture books. And then they called Bates College to speak to the psychologist who created this project with Institute of Museum and Library Services funding. And my librarians said to, I can't remember her name, Krista Aronson, they asked her, we'd like to help you. What would you need help with? How can we expand this project? And the answer was, well, the next step is to do young adult and young adult books, right? And middle grade books. So we need to analyze the new books on the market to see the quality of diverse characters that are being presented in those books. And my librarian said, great, we can do that. We're going to go talk to our grants person, and we're going to figure out how we could help you expand this to middle grade and young adult. And it happens that the University of Florida has one of the largest children's book collections in the entire country. And if you go online and look at the Baldwin Children's Literature Collection, it will blow your mind. And many of these books are already digitized electronically. So we have resources. There's also a degree that you can get at UF in the English department for children's literature. So I started collecting all of the assets at UF that could contribute to a project to create a diverse book finder analytic tool for middle grade and young adult books to evaluate the diversity of those characters. And I helped them create this giant project with 50 volunteers from all over the country who would read these books with funding to buy books so that they can be analyzed and the tool could be expanded. And we were awarded that project, which was close to $500,000. And they're working on the project now, and soon there will be a diverse book finder analytic tool for young adult and middle grade readers.
That's
So,
fabulous.
Congratulations.
Yeah, what a great project to have kind of, I'm the midwife. I'm the person that makes, gets all the assets together and then shows them how they can put it all together. And it turns out that UF had to be the applicant because Bates College didn't have the resources to do the work. So we had a partnership with Bates. They were the directors, but we went ahead and were the applicants for that project.
Oh, that's your best in there, huh?
Yeah. She's answering some questions.
Somebody,
Elite, right?
somebody's background. Oh, well, now that we've talked about an incredible success, what about in terms of grant seeking? What are some of the biggest mistakes people make that I guess don't lead to the successes?
Right. I would say the biggest one is having an idea and thinking that your idea is great and not talking to the program officer in advance about the quality of your idea. And I have interviewed program officers who manage the distribution of funding. And they have said that the biggest problem that they see is that the applicants don't call them. The applicants don't communicate with them about their idea before they submit their proposal.
I would imagine though, a lot of people don't think that they can approach the committee. I mean,
well,
that's
it's not
probably
a committee. It's just the professional person who's being paid to manage the distribution and the allocation of those funds. So
yeah.
they're not talking to the volunteer grant panelists. They're talking to the professional who's managing the program. So another mistake that people make is that they don't start with the timeline and the budget. So the first thing you do is create a timeline of all the activities involved in your project. And then you create a budget that fills in the gaps for funding that you need to execute those activities. And if you do those two things, then you can see for yourself whether your project is feasible or not before you write any narrative. So there's a lot of project planning that happens for grants that has to happen first before people start to answer the narrative questions. If you do this project planning work, you can see whether your project is feasible or not, because that's what the reviewers are going to look at. They're going to look at the budget and say, hey, this doesn't work with the timeline of activities that this applicant wants to complete. And if that doesn't make sense, then the entire narrative doesn't make sense. So those are the two things that I would recommend.
Beyond budget and timeline, which obviously sound incredibly critical, why are some partnerships more successful and others struggle?
I would say the key is that they don't talk about money early on in their conversations. People have an aversion to talking about money. about money that they need in order to execute whatever their part of the project is. So you have to make the partners feel comfortable at the very beginning, talking about what would they need to become a strong partner in this grant proposal, in this project. What don't they have that they need access to? Because they may have a problem contributing. Maybe somebody could mute themselves that's maybe not muted. But
It looks like it's the second Barbara.
Right, it's not me, Bess. I'm up top.
I'm sure it may be someone else that's not muted. So anyway, that is a problem, not talking about money in the front end. The second problem is not determining who the strongest applicant would be. So you have a group of partners and somebody has the idea, but the person with the idea or the organization with the idea isn't necessarily the strongest applicant. So the partners themselves should assess who would be the best applicant. I can give you a for instance.
Yes.
We were doing a partnership with Flagler College. Flagler College is housed in St. Augustine in the former Ponce de Leon Hotel. That is a historic building that was built by Flagler. It was his first hotel. And it's the first hotel, it's the first structure to be built using poured concrete, and it was mixed with coquina shells. Anyway, we got a call from the preservation faculty member there, historic preservation, who said the maintenance man just found all of the plans for the architectural plans for the Ponce de Leon Hotel in the boiler room. And we cannot we can't unroll them because if we do, they will disintegrate. Now, what's really important about those architectural plans is that Thomas Edison was the electrician, and Tiffany was the person that created the stained glass for this hotel.
Wow.
So their handwriting is in these architectural plans. Flagler College did not have the ability, they didn't have a preservation lab, a lab that has the chemicals and knowledge and the personnel and also the equipment to preserve these very precious and delicate architectural plans. So they contacted us and they said, we can't do the work, but we own these documents and they need to be unrolled and then digitized so that they're online and anyone can go and see these. But so we were going to do all of the work, meaning all of the work. They would ship us, they would bring us these architectural plans. I think they were driven actually to us. And we would do all the work and we would digitize them and put them in in the University of Florida digital collections in perpetuity so that they would exist forever in digital format. But so 99% of the money was going to need to come to UF to make this happen. We applied for, it was called Save America's Treasures grant that was sponsored by the National Park Service. And it happened that Flagler College had already received one of those awards. We had never received one of those awards. So they were the strongest applicant because they owned the materials and they had been already awarded previously from that sponsor, regardless of the fact that UF was going to do all the work. So they applied for the project and in partnership with the University of Florida, and we were awarded the full amount, and we went ahead and did that work. And now if you Google Ponce de Leon Hotel architectural plans. You will find them in the UF digital collections.
Now, the big question here is, did the janitor get any credit?
I don't think so.
That's so not right. No, that's a great story. That really was. Wasn't that a great story, Sherry?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great story. Wow. Well, it's been really interesting. This has been very interesting. Does anybody have any other questions or thoughts or anything?
No, it gives me something to think about.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
I'll just take a moment because of something that Sherry said. So, Sherry, I'm Barbara Noble, and
Hi,
I'm
Barbara.
part of a grant making foundation. And of course, what we look for more and more now are like organizations or the organizations that may have common goals, to join together to create a project that we could fund, as opposed to funding individual, for organizations that do similar work. How can we have a greater impact by, again, having them collaborate? And so you had mentioned just a little bit in your remarks. So I would welcome you to try to pursue the workbook that Bess mentioned, and would hope it would bring you great success.
Thank you. That's
well,
me
thank
taking.
you so much,
Thanks,
Bess.
Barbara. Thank you,
And
Karen,
thank
for
you, Bob.
interacting with
Thank
us.
you, Sherry. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you all for joining. This was really very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I did try to run a collab, but I will definitely reach out to you, Bess, to help me perfect it and get it right next time. So I appreciate that.
Of
And
course, Alyssa.
yes, yeah. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Bess, so much for sharing. It was very interesting. It was really great. What a wonderful, wonderful event. I loved the stories. You've got great stories. Very interesting.
Thanks
So,
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
for
everybody have a
insights,
good
Bess.
night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.